everybody. This is the very first Friday Ask Me Anything. And I don't know if anybody's going to show up, but I do have some questions that people wanted me to answer. So, if you do happen to tune in and you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and I should be able to see those and answer them in real time. So, I'm just going to go ahead and actually I will talk a little bit just very briefly about what I want to do with the Ask Me Anythings. So it's basically a time that I wanted to set aside to answer any kind of questions that people may have about writing or how I find time to do this stuff with 6 kids because that's often a question that I get. Any kind of personal questions within reason, and then, anything about the world we live in, and I could try to solve some of the world's problems. But yeah, I'll do the best I can. So, any kinds of questions that you might have, I am here to answer. And I plan to do this every first Friday for as long as I can. Sometimes my schedule may require me to not do it or to, skip one month or something, but I do want to be available to people who have questions. I actually really enjoy answering people's questions most of the time. So, unless you ask me how old I am, which I get a lot at schools. I'm just kidding. I don't even mind that question. So, without further ado, I'm going to start answering these questions. The first one is, why did you choose writing? Did you have any other jobs you wanted to try? This is a question that I got from a kid recently, and it's kind of a difficult one to answer because I almost feel like writing chose me. And that sounds really cheesy to say, but I've always really enjoyed books. So when I was little, I would read and read and read, and that was kind of, it's what I did out in the middle of nowhere, which is where I grew up. In addition to like running wild through fields and stuff. So I had a lot of time when I was little to read, and I read everything that I could, and I just loved books so much that the only thing I could think, I told everybody that I wanted to create books of my own. So I started as a little kid creating these little, computer paper books and stuff where I would illustrate everything and just write my own thing. So I feel like it's kind of always been something that I do, writing. I did it in different ways throughout the years. So I started out as a journalist, and like I said, I always wanted to write books. So when I was done with that, I kind of gravitated more toward the fiction side of things and some nonfiction stuff as well. As far as there being any other jobs, I think being a librarian would probably be a lot of fun for me just because being surrounded by books. I've always thought about how nice it would be to have like a bookshop that was also a coffee shop but a bakery as well. But that requires a lot of other work that other people are probably much better at than I am. So I stick with the writing, and that's what I do. I'm trying to think if there were any other jobs I wanted to do, but I just don't think that there are. This is like the best job ever. So that's an opinion. I know. Other people who love their work have that same opinion. So, how old were you when you wrote your first story? Oh, storybook. This is another question from a kid. So I will say that I wrote my first storybook as soon as I was able to write and illustrated it and all of that. If you're wondering, those early stories were cute, and they sounded a lot like Little House on the Prairie. So I had a brother and a sister, and I would create these situations that we were in, kind of like Laura and Mary and Carrie. And I would just, I'd write about us getting in trouble and the ways that we got ourselves out of trouble. So those were the first stories. But if you're wondering when I wrote my first book, that still never became a book, but it was more than just 8 sheets of paper. That was probably, I wrote a short story when I was in 5th grade that was published in a children's magazine. And after that, I mean, I was working on, a novel probably every year of my life from the time I graduated high school. And none of those early novels were ever published because they weren't very much good. So I shouldn't say very much good. They weren't very good. So one of the things that you learn in writing is that the more you do it, the better you get at it. So those early stories were not that great. So, how many kids do you have? I have 6 children, and their ages are 8 to 16. Sometimes I can't remember how old everybody's getting. But so I'll just say I have a 16-year-old, and then I have a 13-year-old, a 12-year-old, two 11-year-olds who are identical twins, and an 8-year-old. So it's a very fun and active house. Why do you think it's important for students to write and share their stories? That's a good one. I have a lot of things to say about the value of writing. And one of the biggest ones for me is writing helps us process the things that are going on in our lives. And just because students are children doesn't mean that they're not dealing with some really difficult things in their lives, whether it's wondering why a friend is acting a certain way or excluding them from something, or if it's as simple as feeling afraid to take a standardized test or something. Writing can have multiple benefits for those students who are going through things, and everybody is going through things. So just the simple process of writing stories, even if it's a nonfiction story, even if they're writing about something that happened in their day, it's so beneficial to put those things down and to process through them. And then when you add in fiction, it just gives a whole other layer to processing things. Because if you think about, I've studied a lot of psychology, and my children have been to play therapists and things. And the way that therapy works when children are young is they imagine different situations and they use dolls to tell stories. So a kid can be going through something really difficult, and they can put that in a fiction story as though it's happening to somebody else. And there's something in the brain that helps process that. And that can be extremely valuable to kids who are dealing with the divorce of parents, or bad grades in school, or a diagnosis, or any of those kinds of things. It's just extremely valuable. So that's on the processing life side. As far as the practical side of things, I feel like writing and reading have the biggest impacts on education. So if a kid is a good reader, and if a kid is confident in their writing, they're going to go really far in their education and in their lives. And that, to me, is the basis for helping kids succeed in life, is helping them be good readers and helping them be good writers. Because reading opens up a doorway to all kinds of education and to all kinds of worlds and to all kinds of wisdom. And then writing just opens the door to processing those things and creating memories. Writing has been shown to help with memory retention and those mysterious things of the brain. So I think it's extremely valuable for students to write, and I encourage my kids. I keep them stocked with composition books so that they can they can write their own stories that they want. Found one from one of my sons the other day, and it was kind of a dark story, which I wrote as a kid too. I think sometimes kids like to explore that darker side of life. This one was about a dog that accidentally ate poison. So it was it was kind of an interesting story, but he even wrote his biography on the back of the story. And what he said was his name is a son of Rachel Toalson. And then after that, he said, check out her books on the back. And he, on the last, on the flap, the back flap, he, he drew all of my books. And it was just his display. I can't figure out if it was name dropping or if it was like he was doing free advertising for me. So either way, I guess, thank you. Oh, I didn't even get to the share stories. So one of the things that sharing our stories can do is it opens up conversations and it shows people a different reality. So when younger kids are sharing their stories, I think, well, in child development, a kid can see what's in front of their face and they kind of think the world revolves around them. And sharing the different stories of different people helps them imagine a reality that's completely different from their own. So what that does is it helps develop empathy. So sharing stories is a very valuable practice as well. How many times did you fail? Oh, so many times. But what I try what I try to remember in those failure times is that failure is just an opportunity to learn something. And I think this is, it's becoming a little more in the vocabulary of success. Failure is becoming a little more accepted because most of the time when we fail, we learn something that can help us do better. So, for example, those earlier stories that I wrote, I did try to get them published and never got an agent, never had any kind of editor show any interest. And when I look back at them today, I can see exactly what's wrong with them. I probably don't have the time or the energy or feel like it's worth it to fix it because I have better stories to tell today. But those early failures led me into educating myself more about story structure and things that I knew that I didn't quite have a grasp on yet. So approaching failure in that way can be really helpful. Yeah. There are a lot of other things that I failed at too, so we won't go into all of that. How are you right now? Aw, that's so sweet. I'm doing well. um, One of the things about being in a creative career and being a writer is emotions can go up, down, up, down. There's one day that you'll see some kind of victorious thing, and then the next day you're kind of down in the dumps about your writing and your stories. And maybe I was just thinking yesterday, I don't know if I can ever top that story. And that's something that writers, I think a lot is once you have that book that's out there or two books that are out there, you think, I don't know if I can ever do that again. I don't know if I can ever write a story that is as good as that one. I don't know what to say about that, except that if we're doing our jobs and if we're constantly improving, we will write another book. And it will be as good as, if not better than, the ones that we have out there. My husband asked me yesterday when I was kind of in that little funk, he said, what if the greatest book you've ever written has not even been imagined by you yet? And I have a whole folder of stories that I've already imagined. And it's hard for me to imagine that I have not yet even thought of the best story I could write. But that's like a really hopeful thing, you know? It keeps you coming back to what you do. Because what if the greatest thing you've ever done has not even been imagined by you yet? How cool is that? That was kind of a roundabout way to answer the question of how are you? Okay, how long does it take to write a book? This is a question I get really often, and I always have to say that it depends because there are some stories that are really easy to tell for a lot of different reasons. Maybe they've been up in our heads for a really long time, so they've had time to incubate, and once we sit down to write them, it just all comes pouring out and it's all wonderful and it's all like unicorns and rainbows and this is the best job ever. But then there are other stories that are not easy at all to tell. And they take lots and lots of drafts and they take lots and lots of tries and fails, I guess. Yeah, I'm a writer, I can make up words. So there are some of my stories that have taken, you know, two, maybe three drafts. And a draft of a story for me generally takes around, I would say like 3 or 4 months for one draft. And then I never just stop at one draft because that's, it's kind of like spilling it all out and it's a mess most of the time. Even though I plot and brainstorm my stories, there's a lot that needs to be fixed in those drafts. And so I need at least one more draft. My books probably average around 5 or 6 drafts, but there have been some recently that took me like 11 or 12 drafts because I had to get the structure right and I had to layer in humor and I had to make sure that the pacing was okay and I had to make sure that I said things the right way. So there's just a lot of it just really depends on the story. I find that the ones that are closer, maybe the ones that are, no, I can't even say that. I was going to say the ones that are closer to my story take less or take more time because you're being really careful about all of the things you say. But I can't even say that because I wrote a sequel to a book that's coming out in May that took like 3 drafts and it was done within, it wasn't even 6 months. And I was really happy with the end result. And so, and it was a story that's directly related to my life. So I don't know. I don't know what it is that makes a story easy to write and what makes one hard. I think sometimes it could be just state of mind. And like I said, some stories have been incubating for years in our heads. And so when we finally sit down to write them, they pour out. So how many people laughed at you when you were little? I think this is from a kid who people have laughed at. That's really sad. I mean, I got laughed at a lot too because I was kind of I thought I was a know it all and I always carried a notebook everywhere. I had a book all the time. So I'm sure, I don't know, I didn't place much emphasis on people laughing at me. It did make me mad when adults laughed at me when I told them I was going to be a writer. And that's probably, you know, that's probably one of the annoying things about when you're a kid who knows exactly what you want because sometimes kids are seen as idealists and of course they don't know all of the things that have to go into, for example, becoming a writer. But I think some of us just know when we're really young, and I knew that I had it in me. And it really made me mad when people would laugh when I would say, I want to be a writer. And they'd be like, oh, that's so precious. It's not precious. It's true. So, anyway, I love all of those people. They were wonderful people. It's just sometimes we can doubt that kids know what they want. And what if we put more faith in them and in the things that they know about themselves? Okay. What was your first book? It doesn't need to be published. Oh, so when I was working as a journalist for the San Antonio Express News, I would come home every day after work, even after like writing tons of stories while I was there. I would come home every day and I would write on this novel called Red Letter Day, which is, first of all, not a great title, and I know that now. But it was also kind of the story of my mom's life. It was very clunky. It was way too long, and it had way too many perspectives, including perspectives from adults and children. So, like, I broke all kinds of rules. And part of it was that I think I needed that story to find my bearings and show my, I don't know, practice a little bit and to show my deficiencies. Because if I hadn't ever sat down to write that story, I don't know that I would have gone on a journey of learning more about story structure and things like character development and the specific genres that I wanted to write in. So I don't know. That's, like I said, failure is like an opportunity to grow. So looking back, I think I still have that story somewhere on my hard drive, and I probably just want to destroy it because, you know, if if after I die, after a long time of living, after I die, somebody discovers that story, it would be a little bit embarrassing for people to read. Although I guess it could be educational too, because then you could see, like, oh, this was her first story. Well, this was the last one, and you can kind of see the progression. Hopefully, if we're constantly improving, we can hopefully see that. Okay, I think I have time for one more question. So I'm going to answer this one. Do you get scared sometimes? I feel like I get scared a lot. And part of that is that I have anxiety. So my brain is constantly looking toward the future and imagining worst case scenarios. Basically, that's what anxiety does. It imagines worst case scenarios for everything. So that makes living life, especially in the present, kind of scary. But I also, well, yeah, that's a big part of what I'm scared of, because I think about the future and I think about, even now, I think about failure or I think about disappointment and I feel afraid. And then I think about when I release books out into the world and it's a world of reviewers. What are people going to say about that book? Especially the ones that are very close to me, because then it feels like they're saying that about me and my life. And that's a difficult thing. It's a very scary thing. Um, as far as everyday fears, I am afraid of the dark. And let's see, what else? Because, kids would probably want to know, is she afraid of a lot of things? I'm afraid of a lot of things. I'm afraid of spiders. If one of my, or actually my kids, for the last April Fool's Day, thought it would be funny. They have this it's a very realistic, you have to take my word for it, a very realistic Lego spider that's, I mean, it's like the size of a house spider, basically. And they thought it would be funny to hang it by a string right outside my bedroom door. So when I got up to go for my run early in the morning, that was the first thing I walked into. And it was this like black spider hanging there. And I am impressed that I did not wake anybody up because I did not scream, but I did do a very, very impressive matrix move where I like back bent and tried to get away from a Lego spider. So that's how afraid I am of spiders. Um, I really don't like snakes. Um, I had lots of encounters with snakes when I was a kid because we lived out in the middle of nowhere. So I remember this one specific time when there was a rattlesnake on our front porch. And we were kind of trapped inside because it was like right by the screen door. So my mom had to call a neighbor. Actually, my dad owned a gun at the time, which we won't say anything about gun. I don't like guns. Um, but he had it because where we lived, we would have coyotes come and get into our garden and stuff. And I won't say anything about that either. But anyway, but my mom took the shotgun and she shot through the screen door to the rattlesnake and like blew it to explosion. So and then she had to call a neighbor to come help like clean it up. She had done the hard part, but she had to call a neighbor to help clean it up. So, and I also remember a time when I was really little, like probably 3 or 4, and there were 2 snakes in a tree, and we watched my mom from our car like hack them up with a hoe. So, snakes were always very scary things to me. So, even now, when my cats like bring them as gifts on our back porch, it's scary to me. My son's like picking them up and trying to keep them as pets, and absolutely not. So, those are a few of the things I'm scared of in practical everyday life. All right, so that is all the time we have for today's Ask Me Anything. But I really enjoyed answering these questions. And if you have any questions of your own, you can feel free to put them in the comments and I will gather them for next time. Or you can join me on the next first Friday, Ask Me Anything, which will probably happen at 1 o'clock instead of 1:30 because I think that would be a better time and it works for me. So hopefully it'll work for others. So please give me any questions that you have about writing or my life or what made me become a writer or what brought me here or, any pressing issues about the world. I would love to answer anything that you have. So thanks for joining me today, and I will see you. Actually, let me look and see what the next First Friday is. Hang on. So I will see you May 5th at 1 o'clock right here. Thanks for watching. I'm not sure how to get off of this. So, bear with me. Hmm.